I guess.
I'm Monica Cross. I am the production manager and technical director at New College of Florida. I work as a dramaturg and a text coach on Shakespearean productions, sort of all over the country. I'm currently working on a production of Romeo and Juliet in LA. My first introduction to Shakespeare happened when I was about 10 years old. My father, somewhat erroneously, said, well, you like medieval stuff, and you're in all the church plays, so you'll probably like Shakespeare. We got a VHS copy of The Taming of the Shrew, which is maybe also not the first thing to show your daughter, but I loved it. And that summer I watched 13 of Shakespeare's plays on film. I was the most educated middle schooler in regards to Shakespeare that probably ever existed. And then I saw my first play live. My father drove me like 2 hours to see a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was blown away. Every year after that, he took me to see a play, and each one of them had something different to teach me. Maybe not even about Shakespeare, but about, like, one year there was a scaffolding set for Romeo and Juliet, and, like, over here was Mantua, and over there was the Capulet house, and the street was in front, and just this very bare set contained an entire world, and I was like, you can do that! Shakespeare really introduced me, like, oddly, my introduction to Shakespeare then introduced me to the rest of theater. And that's how I learned how to do different things, was through watching Shakespeare. The first thing that I look for is the language. How are the actors handling it? And really, I always say that there are sort of 3 levels to performing Shakespeare's text. The first level is like, I'm not even really sure what I'm saying, I'm just up here saying words. The second is like, I know what I'm saying, but I'm not entirely certain how to communicate it. And the third level is, I know what I'm saying, and I know how to teach you what I'm saying just by saying it. And that is what my training is in, and what I try to teach others when I'm working on a production. From there, I'm really interested in, like, Shakespeare's language was designed to be engaging. So when I look at a production, it's like, well, if you're saying, should I kill him, just sort of as if it is a rhetorical question, then I'm less interested in it than if you look at an audience member and you're like, do I kill Claudius now? Because that's written into the text. It's like, do I kill him here? And then he immediately says, that would be scanned. And then he explains why he shouldn't. But in that, he has the opportunity that no matter how the audience responds, yes, no, do it, don't do it, his response of, let's take a moment to look at that, allows him to play with either response. So Shakespeare's language is really designed so that you can ask the audience a yes or no question, and then whichever side they say, your response then can respond to them. And beyond that, I really love spectacle, fun songs, like doing interesting things with Shakespeare is always fascinating to me. So the training that I received, which is sometimes called original practices, and sometimes called Shakespeare staging conditions, and there are a whole bunch of other names for it, really looks at what is the historical knowledge that we have. And one of the things that we do know about it is that there would have been musicians in the gallery, particularly in the indoor playhouses where they would have to trim the candles. And that's where you get your 5-act structure, is really like, we can't go the whole play with just these candles. We're gonna have to trim the wicks, get the wax out of there and put new candles in, so forth. And so during that, there would be musical interludes, and there would be tumbling. Most of the time that I have spent doing Shakespeare has been intrinsically linked to music, whether that is generating original scores for the songs that Shakespeare provides lyrics for, or finding really funny and sometimes inappropriate songs to pair with Shakespeare's text, like Paint It Black for Hamlet. So the ballad stanza, it's a very set metrical form, and it's so pervasive that there are sort of jokes about it, like, we can sing any of Emily Dickinson's poems to the Yellow Rose of Texas. That's something that you hear people say, oddly, a surprising amount of time. I first encountered it actually sort of in a religious context when I discovered that Amazing Grace can be sung to everything from, like, some weird commercial jingle from a million years ago, House of the Rising Sun, and Gilligan's Island. The thing that I think is fascinating here is that because Ophelia's songs, in particular the Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day song, fall into that ballad stanza, you have the option to change how that song becomes a manifestation of her psyche. Is it completely... Is there this disjunction that completely separates the tune from the content, or is it this soulful tune? And because a lot of people do know and can easily recognize Gilligan's Island or House of the Rising Sun, you have that option to add those connotations into the script in your performance. Yeah.
It's also cool.
I am very vaguely aware. I actually was just sent a section of Lady M's, like her sleepwalking section from an opera. And I think that it's fascinating that it has been adapted, but I think that that's part of the pervasiveness of Shakespeare's work. And I could talk all day long about why I think that is, but all of my assumptions about that would just be that, assumptions. From the Restoration, starting the Restoration, Nahum Tate, and then later Garrick and a whole bunch of others were like, Shakespeare's great, but also we should change it, and started rewriting plays. Even actually immediately following Shakespeare's career, a fellow playwright named John Fletcher wrote plays like The Tamer Tamed, or The Woman's Prize, which is a sequel to The Taming of the Shrew. But so, basically, from the time that Shakespeare was even writing, playwrights, poets, authors, musicians, composers began saying, okay, that's something that we want to respond to. That desire to take Shakespeare's story, which isn't really even Shakespeare's, right? Like, he stole all of his stories from Holinshed, from Ovid, and other people.
Things.
But these stories that Shakespeare has made iconic, and to take them for themselves and to do something new with them and put them in dialogue. The Romantic era is actually when the belief that Shakespeare may not have written his plays originates. It started actually with an American woman who was a bit of a failed playwright herself, and she was a very disgruntled school teacher, and she said that Shakespeare couldn't possibly have written Shakespeare's plays. It must have been Sir Francis Bacon. And that was sort of the first. And then we get the Earl of Oxford. Some people say, like, maybe even, like, Marlowe didn't die, and, like, took on a new identity. Some say that maybe even Queen Elizabeth wrote it herself. There are all sorts of weird things, but they originate from the Romanticist notion of the lone poet on the countryside composing ballads extemporaneously, just out of their own angst. The thing that is interesting about that is, A, it's super classist. The entire argument is Shakespeare couldn't possibly have written Shakespeare's plays because he wouldn't have had a good enough education to. But it's very much so out of this idea that Shakespeare should have been a Byron or a Shelley. Yeah. And I think that that's a really interesting connection, because basically the Romanticists loved Shakespeare in such a way that they're like, we've got to make him look like us. They enjoyed his work, and then they said, okay, he's got to be one of us. He can't be who he was. He has to be like us.
Would you like to hear the Witches Chorus?
Yes.
Okay, I'll turn this on.